Well, thank you very much for that, Tanya. We're not mic'd, so we're going to speak clearly. I hope that everyone can hear us. I am, as mentioned, Kevin McKeown, and I'm going to introduce myself, and then each of my colleagues will give a little summary of who they are and how they got here. I began not as a publicist or, God help me, an actor, but I started in 1970 as the Georgia Strait's gay news columnist, and very shortly after that, because I had seen a play, I was asked if I would do a second column every week on the arts scene, which was everything: theater, dance, music, nightclubs, you name it. I just sort of followed along in Jack Wasserman's footsteps and followed his instructions. So I did that for 20 years as a journalist, not 20 years with the Straight, but as a journalist and an editor, often doing columns that covered the cultural scene. And I did that for 20 years. And then I had a kind of a change of pace. I'd been in Montreal for a couple of years editing a magazine. I came back, and my friend David Y.H. Louis called me and said, "Kevin, Dave Abbott and I think you're underemployed. You're going to be the publicist for the first Canadian International Dragon Boat Festival." To which I responded, "David, what's a dragon boat?" And thus began a career that, well, 5 years later, I was the publicist for the Dragon Boat, the children's, the writers, the folk music, Theatre Under the Stars, Word on the Street. There were a few years there where I probably lost my mind. But I did that for another 20 years. Wow. And it was great. And I used to say to people, it was easy. I just got up from my newsroom desk, went around to the other side, sat down and said, okay, now I'm the publicist. Listen to my stories. And that's how I got here. Ellie?
Well, I kind of had 3 serial careers, which led to publicity. So the first one is I started as a broadcaster, and as many people know, I was the first female rock DJ in this country. Yes. So I like to say I rocked this town.
You did.
So I did that, and oddly, I found it a little dull because it's very repetitious doing top 40 radio. And I started doing interviews with artists. And so that led me down a little path that led to a call from the Georgia Straight, who said, would you like to come do some writing for us? So my first options were to just review records, which I did. But then Sorrel Sedman had the column, the weekly column, and she stepped away from it, and so I ended up with the Faces column. I never got the opportunity to change the name of that column. So I did that for a bit. I was doing a little TV on the side at CBC as well, and finally I got to the sort of the end of that part of my career, and I was hired as the first executive director for the Pacific Music Industry Association, which I did for almost a decade. And so that was the first time I'd had a job, even though I was everybody at the place. It was a one-person office. So at the end of that, I felt a little burnt out, took off a little bit of time, and said to my then boyfriend, you know, I'm going to hang out my shingle and be a publicist. And he said, just like that? And I said, yeah, they know me, just
exactly.
Like that. And it happened just like that. A few musicians were the first ones to jump in and say, would you do more publicity? And then out of that, I got a call one day from the late Norman Armour. Now, I knew Norman from doing arts advocacy work. And Norman said, come work for me. And I said, Norman, what do I know about theater? And he says, well, you come to theater? I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, you'll figure it out. So that was my entry into 20 years of publicity. And I'm going to hand it over to Lynn.
Ooh. I feel like I'm sort of the quiet sister here, but we may prove me wrong. Because I started out in mime. And, flip. I'd spent a few years in Paris studying mime and singing and theater stuff, so it wasn't just, I went into mime because I talked too much, actually, so it does balance out. But so when I came to Vancouver in '74, first I started out as a set painter, and that was for the Arts Club, passionately enough. And then I did start Axis Theatre Company, and I performed with Carousel Theatre's first show, and got a bad review from my current husband, had he told me that, he might not be my husband now, but I didn't find that out till later. And then, but then I performed for about 10 years, more or less. And then I had a family, so that sort of stopped that. But what that did start was, I was a journalist too, but for co-op radio. And it was an arts program called Pigeon Park Review, of all things. And but I did reviews and interviewed a whole lot of people for many years, for about 8 years, until I became a single mom then. And fortunately, Touchstone Theatre had an opening for a trainee. Mature women re-entering the workforce, it was called then. But praise the Lord, because 3 of us crammed into the little Touchstone office, and I got to train under the wonderful Bronwyn Sutherland for a year. And then a job came up at the Arts Club, and I became a company gal there for 12 years. And called publicist, but also communications manager, marketing manager, sponsorship person. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between freelance, because I did a lot of, if it was an agency, I would have been the art director and the copywriter, more or less. There was another publicist, Marlene Dixon, who had been there since Bill Millard started, really. So I'd come up with the concepts, the marketing concepts, write the copy, do all the stuff, tell Marlene who to call. So I shook the bushes and she shot. It was our sort of relationship for a long time, until Marlene really did retire. She wasn't on site. And I was there until 2001, when we moved to Kingston, Ontario. And I did some theater marketing there too. So, but more or less it was marketing, there was a one newspaper area, so you didn't have 300 people on your media list in Kingston, Ontario. And of course times have changed since then too. Media lists, as we'll talk, are almost an archaic thing. But so we came back here just 2 years ago, but I've been retired for 10 years, basically. I did go back into performing a bit with a diverse theater company, a neurodivergent theater company that needed some outsiders, some old folks to join in, and so that's been the sort of loop there for me.
Terrific. So many names that you're both dropping that, ring bells, bring back. So are you sure we don't have like 3 or 4 hours? We could.
Yeah, we could fill.
Raise your hand every time you recognize a name. There you go.
Yeah. This is kind of loosey-goosey. We haven't had a rehearsal. We haven't met. We've been communicating by email a bit, and we've kind of got a list of questions that Lynn and I basically put together to ask one another. But this is a salon. If something pops into your mind and you have a question you'd like to ask, just put your hand up. I can see most of you, so that should be okay. And some of these questions we'll get into quite a lot of storytelling. Some of them are really be quick and cheerful. And the first one is such a one, and that is asking each of us, what is your earliest memory of a theater event in Vancouver? And I'll go first. My first theater memory is Theater Under the Stars. I would think circa 1958. Ooh. My parents were not big theater-going people, ever, but for some reason they took it into their heads to get a babysitter for my little brother and take me down to Theater Under the Stars. And I still remember that the show we saw was The King and I. I have no idea who was in it in 1958, but there may be someone here who was in it in 1958. I don't know. But that was my first exposure to live theater. Ellie?
This is a hard one for me because I was in the music business, but as Norman said, I did attend theater. So I remember that I was a regular and a donor at Touchstone so this would be probably in the early 80s.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Lynn?
The first show was Alice in Wonderland at the P&E that the Arts Club was producing in 1974 because I was hired to paint scenery for it. A buddy of mine who was associated with the arts group, General Idea, got me a job painting scenery. But there were so a whole bunch of actors were also painting scenery with us, but also working there. Wendy Gorling, who was a buddy from mime school and later partner, she was one of the Tweedledum and Tweedledees, I believe, with Lanny Reynolds, and it was big, sprawling, and crazy.
The next question is sort of related because it's the next step. How did each of us first get involved in theater personally?
Oh.
And my answer is twofold. In 1963, I was in high school in Prince Rupert. So I was 13 years old. And the school drama club, I think it was the school drama club, or maybe it was the community theater, and they were casting at the high school, put on Tea House of the August Moon. And I did something you couldn't do today. I was 13, I dyed my hair black and browned my face, and I was a little villager in Tea House of the August Moon. I later discovered that my theater debut was under the direction of a very famous director who was at that time at UBC, Norman Young. Was brought up to Prince Rupert to direct Tea House of the August Moon, so I have performed under the direction of the finest. But that was my one time on stage. But as I mentioned earlier, I started at the Georgia Strait in 1970, but previous to that, for a few months, I was freelancing for the West Ender. So I was 19 years old. Didn't know a thing about a thing and was just sort of making it up as I went along, as I still do. And somebody at the West Ender had tickets to a play at the Playhouse called The Royal Hunt of the Sun, directed by Paxton Whitehead. And so off I went and I wrote a review. Years later, and I like to say that this fellow and I sort of started our careers together, years later I discovered that not only was this my first theater reviewing experience, it was our Glenn MacDonald's first on-stage performance in Vancouver. So Glenn and I go back a little ways. And I was writing the gay column in the Georgia Strait, and shortly after that, they said, well, why don't you know theater. I'd seen a play. Why don't you? And so I began a column called The Rounder, which I wrote through to about 1975, which exposed me to everything on stage in nightclubs, theaters, concert halls in Vancouver for all of those years. And the thing that triggered it was I was writing the gay column, and Vancouver Contemporary Theatre under John Parker, who some of you will remember, put on at the Old Colonial Theatre a play called The Boys and the Band, which was very controversial in its day. And someone told their publicist, a woman named Joy Metcalf, who's with us here today, the Georgia Strait has a gay column, you need to go down. I wrote under the pseudonym QQ Writes, page 69. I'm in the back room at the Georgia Strait. Yeah, Dal Richards, when he had me on his radio show, read that out, and then he said, very subtle. I was in the back, probably doing layout, paste up, something, and somebody came in from the front desk and said, Kevin, there's a woman out front wants to meet Mr. QQ. And so began a 55-year friendship that endures to this day, and that's how I ended up writing about theater. So, Lynn?
First theater, well, I'm a Yankee, still half. And so there was a summer stock theater company in the city where I was, tiny city in Michigan. Didn't have that far to go to come to Canada. And I spent 3 years as an apprentice there. and 2 years performing, and then 1 whole year just scene painting and designing. So I was in and they did like 8 shows a year, The Drunkard, Oklahoma, Student Prince, you know, so I can sing Valley High. I can probably do most lyrics still from most of those, you know, Rodgers and Hammerstein shows. But, and I couldn't sing then particularly, but you know, that they didn't know that. So that was that, but that was like running away to the circus. Even though the circus came to our town, it was like, oh yeah, you can make people make a living from pretending. Cool. All right, I can relate to that. My mother, I thought I was a good actor because my mother believed every lie I ever spoke, and you know, but she was just shy. But anyway, I didn't end up having much theater training until I went to Paris and did the mime and stuff. So, and a bunch of crazy workshops. But that was my beginning. But I think it was, in fact, most everybody I knew in the backstage world in the theater in the 70s had been stage people too. You know, that was another way to make a living. You know, everybody was highly theater. In fact, sometimes there was more theater backstage than there was on stage. You know, we're not naming too many names, but there's a certain accountant that was really nasty. But so we ended up being able to relate to what was going on stage, and I think having been particularly in mime, which was physical, and it wasn't that. I mean, I know that stuff, but you know, it wasn't that sort of mime. But you could relate to the body language of what was not being said, as well as scripts. You know, so I think it was a distinct advantage having had some performing experience, being able to hear and feel what you were reading, to know what was coming ahead, because you had to publicize it before you even saw rehearsal. You know, you got going 2 or 3 months ahead of time, and you had to have a visceral sense of what people were going to be seeing up there. And I think it was an advantage for me. So.
Well, I sort of mentioned this in that Norman Armour was the one who gave me the call for my first theater experience. But one thing I remember about that gig is it was a one-man show. It was Kamyar Chai, and I'm trying to remember the title of it. But he's playing a prisoner at Dimona Prison in Israel. And so it wasn't a very complex show to get your head around. I mean, the script was the script. It was a monologue. But at some point along the line, Norman turned to me and said, oh, do we have a media call coming up? I turned to somebody and said, what the hell is a media call? So for those who don't know, it's when you call the TV cameras in, usually on your dress rehearsal or something like that, to get a clip to use on television. They don't do that anymore, because everybody has their own B-roll. Everybody makes their own video. But in those days, we had to call the TV stations. So I very quickly whipped together a couple of people and actually pulled off my first media call. So, but I just remember that sinking feeling in my stomach. What's a media call?
I think maybe I should break it up. Instead of, I'll ask the questions, and I don't need to be the first one to answer.
Right.
Let's go around in circles here.
One of us can jump in.
Yeah, so one of the questions, I think this was your question, Lynn. What were the most important skills you brought to your work? Ellie, what were the most important skills?
Well, certainly, for me, it was coming from radio and then a bit of television and then a decade of print. I knew what each media needed. So it's really an insight if you come to it from that point of view, because I knew exactly which shows or which pitch to use for print, which pitch to use for television, and so on.
Yeah.
That's really important. And I think I'd already just talked about being able to embody and to feel what a script was, and to visualize. I think visualizing was really important, to be able to see what that probably is going to look like. But then you had to communicate, dialogue with the director, whoever you had on board. The director was the first one, or Bill Millard, who had programmed the show in the first place, and to try to compose a vision of something that then you could talk about. and in a way matchmaking too. I can't say I was a greatly successful matchmaker at things, but to be able to picture there, which happened after, more or less after doing the radio reviewing stuff, because I'd realized, not wanting to say anything bad about anybody in the end, I thought there's somebody for everybody. And there's some show for everybody. So the marketing sense of being able to picture who is this primarily for, these days they just call it marketing, and who else might it be for? And I think that was probably pretty important, particularly, you know, you can't be everything to everybody. But I also think I was a plain speaker. I wasn't an academic. And so the Arts Club was, main competitor was the Playhouse at that point in time. But the Playhouse was sort of the more elevated company at that time. And the Arts Club was accessible, but I wanted the Arts Club to be seen for the smarter company that it actually was, which we call branding today, really. Because there was a lot of intelligence. Bill Millard was a very modest person, actually. Hard to believe it, with hundreds and hundreds of shows under his belt. So to be able to elevate the visuals and the dialogue, and to know quality on that level too in your marketing materials, and to be able to, but yet to be able to speak plainly to people was really important to me. Yeah.
I think you both really answered the question for me, especially Ellie, because I came to doing PR work after 20 years as a journalist and editor, and so I knew what they needed and how they needed it and when they needed it. Yeah. And when not to call. Yes. No, don't call the producer now, their show's on the air. No, the editor is in production. She doesn't want to hear from you. Call tomorrow morning. And how to package the material and how it got processed at the other end. Quick anecdote, I was at one point interviewed to do the publicity for Vancouver Symphony. And to the meeting, they brought me one of their media kits. Remember media kits? Yeah. In this glossy folder with all these die-cut inserts, pages and pages of, you know, all the press release and then background stuff and bios. And
8x10 glossies.
8x10 glossies. And I sat there and I said, well, do you want to know what happens with these when they land on the editor's desk? And I opened it up and I pulled out the first page, the media release. I took the rest of it and dropped it in the trash. I did not get the gig. Apparently I had a bad attitude, but
but you were right.
I was. Thank you, Ellie.
And I remember, because I came from the music side, and we did the press kits at that time, but by the time I moved to theater, I remember bringing a few directors kicking and screaming into electronic press kits. Oh, they just could not go there, and I was like, nobody's going to use this 8x10. You know, they don't know how to use it anymore. It's not in their computer.
You know, I was told that I was the first publicist to use email to send out media releases.
Really?
I was at the Writers' Festival. Ooh. And the first year there, I did the media kit and the printing and everything was so bloody expensive. But we were all on email at that point, and everybody had email, and you'd send little notes, and I thought, So I sent my media release and kit out digitally. And very short moments later, got a phone call from some editor saying, Kevin, this is amazing. I'm surprised nobody else has thought of this.
Good for you.
And away we went into the digital age.
But writing the media releases was a great era. I mean, I sort of bemoan that, and people answered their phones. That's the thing. I think we were so lucky. You know, we really were, that, you know, I could call up Lloyd Dick, rest his soul, and they would answer. It wasn't even answering machines that often. So the forging the relationships, but again, finding out what they like and how they like it, and give it to them just that way, as they say, ain't misbehaving.
Oh, speaking of which, do you remember that Colin Thomas couldn't open PDFs for the longest time?
Well, neither could I. But I mostly worked in back east. Of course, it was all electronic by the time we went in 2000. But until 2000, we were having media releases delivered. My kids still have the paper cuts on their tongues from sealing envelopes to the 300 media things we had to send out. You know, but but it was a good era that at least you had a real relationship
Yeah.
with people, even if it was short and shallow and respectful. But we did learn how to summarize. I learned how at the end years to summarize the whole media release in brief at the very top of it.
Yep.
And I figured that one out, which was more like a public service announcement, really. But so you don't want to read the whole thing quick. Here's it. Okay, yes or no. But yeah, it was a bit competitive, though. Let's face it, it was sort of
sure.
fun.
Especially for the covers, but we'll get around to
Oh,
well,
covers.
yes, the
Well.
covers. Yes. What price a cover? Now we get into the. Well, we might spill some tea here.
Uh-oh.
What were your most memorable PR stunts that you were part of? This was your question. You
Oh, yes.
answer it first.
Mine weren't huge, but I would dress up. Sweeney Todd, we had a diner in the theater, so they made me a bunch of meat pies, and I dressed up as Mrs. Lovett and went around to probably 100 people delivering meat pies with my media kits. But they liked that media kit. And for one called Maniac Bride, we got a bunch of us to dress up, which by the late David King. It was a crazy thing. We got a bunch of us to dress up in wedding gowns and go into all the clubs and schmooze with people about that and hand out flyers. And there was another thing where they brought in a show called Sylvia that they needed a dog for. Well, these days you just get a dog wrangler, but we made a call for dogs, and people all came with their dogs, and that got a lot of press because there were, I think, maybe 100 dogs on Granville Island there waiting to be cast. Had no intention of casting them, most likely, but
Ellie?
I don't really have any.
didn't have any stunts.
No.
Well, that's good because
Not
I've
a
got one.
stunty kind
I've
of
got two of my own and two from someone who's no longer with us, but I think they're worth telling. Personally, probably I was doing a whole lot of festivals through the 90s and 2000s, and at one point, the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association decided that they were going to put on an annual event called a Buskers Festival, and it was going to be called Street Fair. And they hired a woman, I'm afraid I don't remember her name, to produce it, and she phoned me. And it was quite an ego stroke. She said, I've been hired by the DVBIA to put on this street fair festival. I said, oh, good, congratulations. She said, and I understand that if I do a festival in Vancouver, I have to hire you as my publicist. So, okay, I'm on the spot here, sure. Yeah, thank you. And so I did. And I did that for a few years. And fortunately for me, at that time, Philip Owen was the mayor of Vancouver. Philip was always game for anything.
Yep.
And I had him on one occasion, we launched some sort of art thing, and I had him come down to Granville Island and put on an artist's smock and a beret and sign the city declaration with a paintbrush photo ops, right? But the craziest one, and at that time his executive assistant was a woman named Muriel Honey. And Muriel was really good at, sending the mayor to just about anything I asked for. And he was really good at coming and doing it. But one year, we had a fire breather performing at the Buskers Festival. And I phoned Muriel and I pitched her. I said, I'd love to have a photo op down at the Pendulum Gallery to launch this festival. And this guy tells me that he can teach anybody to eat fire. It's just, apparently you line your lips and your mouth with something and Muriel hesitated and she said, okay, Kevin, all right, I trust you, all right, okay. Ooh. And Philip showed up on time, and that was the first time I'd ever met Muriel. She came with him. She said, I'm sorry, Kevin, I just had to make sure that you weren't going to set our mayor on fire. And we had the front page of the following day's Sun, Philip Owen,
wow,
swallowing fire. And that was great fun. I enjoyed that. But there was another fellow who I met very late in his career, a man named Fred Hill. he went back a long ways. In fact, there was a story that he dined out on for years. He worked with Joy Coghill's husband, Jack Thorne, when they were, this was in the mid-50s. And they did a show down on a theater on Hastings called Tobacco Road. It was a very controversial show. And Fred was the publicist. They got front page coverage. They got front page coverage because Fred phoned the police and phoned several Christian organizations. Opening night, there were protesters, Christian protesters out front, and the police raid arrested, I think, 2 of the actors on obscenity charges. Of course, it was all over the front pages. Fred did that. Some years later, I was writing for a newspaper in Victoria. This would be the late 70s. And Fred was, had a client, a restaurant called the Parrot House. And they actually had a live parrot in the restaurant.
I remember that.
And one day, Fred phones me up, because I've got a daily column and a daily radio show at the time. I was CJVI's Man About Town, with apologies to Maurice Foisier. And he said, Kevin, someone has kidnapped the parrot. Well, of course, the dailies, the weeklies, it was all over the news. And it kept on for several days, and then the parrot was surreptitiously returned because the heat was on. And we later learned that it was Fred who had taken the parrot and had not told the restaurant owners that that was what he was going to do, so they were quite authentically alarmed about their parrot being kidnapped. So those are some stunts, PR stunts. I couldn't pretend to match Fred Hill. He briefly had an agency, a PR agency with our mutual friend Dave Abbott, and then he moved to Victoria, and the last we heard of him, he was driving cab in Victoria. That was many years ago. But
he was really brilliant. He had great ideas.
He did.
Carried them through.
He did. He was quite the character. So that's I can't believe
Can't
you never
top
pulled
that
any
one,
stunts.
No, I really can't think of anything.
I know the Arts Club, actually, and this wasn't my idea, but when they were creating A Closer Walk with Patsy Cline, the Dean Regan show, it was somebody's idea to have an open audition for that and just bring a lot of people in. And I remember Renee de Ruyter, who wrote for the Province, was one of the people and who came, and I don't think they were rating as well. They weren't casting. But it was a really disparate group, and I think the outcome was actually already set before this fake audition. But it was a way to get Patsy Cline's music and her legend into the eyes of people. But I always thought I was an honest publicist. That was me. You know, I wouldn't lie about things. I would just find the angle that spoke to whoever I was speaking to. So I didn't create that. But it was interesting.
Next question was.
Isn't this fun interviewing ourselves?
Yes, are we having fun? I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as we are. What are the most challenging, you said challenging, I added / ridiculous things a theater or media person asked you to do? This was your question? Why don't you do?
I could start. Well, the papers used to come out in the morning. I don't know what they do now. Well, we get ours in the morning, but for a while they didn't. And whenever there was a bad review, the boss would buzz me up. First thing, the intercom would ring in the morning and ask me to complain about it. Ask me to call the Sun, usually, because they were the toughest one. And I would refuse because I didn't believe you should do that. And there was another director / writer / actor who's very well known, Morris, who
Oh, you're much more discreet than I'm going to be.
well, who went through a period of insisting that the Georgia Strait reviewer, not you, what would be barred from the theater and not invited. And I wouldn't do that either, you know. And we had to have, because it's not you know, that's what reviews are. They're bad. There used to be a lot of reviewers, so people could pick and choose. I mean, that was another lucky thing about the old days. But people would read them, allegedly. So that was the worst thing. And then there was an actor whose name I will mention again, Shirley Douglas, who's Kiefer Sutherland's mom and Tommy Douglas's daughter. She came to town, and we didn't have a lot of stars from out of town here, but she did make everybody's life hell. She made Nicola Cavendish's life hell on stage.
I was in that show.
Oh, you were too.
Made my life hell.
So I'm not lying, right? I'm being in the truth. And she insisted I drive her across the street for a media interview. The place was right across the street from her hotel. And it was also particularly galling because she was so nasty to everybody. Now that I have problems walking myself a little bit, I wonder, well, maybe you could give her the benefit of but she was fine on stage every night, so I don't think that was the problem, right?
Well,
Let Bernard take this.
Nikki acted her off the stage, as it were. So
Ah.
she didn't pull too many tricks.
No, so.
She was there for herself and no one else.
And it was a surprise.
That
You
ain't
know, it really
theater.
was a surprise, giving her NDP pedigree and all. You know, but she was hardly.
Donald Sutherland's ex-wife.
Yes, Donald's ex-wife. Anyway,
Well,
I don't want to, again, I'm,
no.
again, like you, directors asking me to call the media about something, I refused as well.
Yeah.
yeah. The most ridiculous request I ever had was from Duncan Lowe when he was running the Culch. See, I don't mind naming names. And this may be the same journalist, because he asked me to bar Shannon Rupp, who was the critic at the Georgia Street at the time, from the theater. And I said, you mean you want me to take her off the media invite list? She said, no, I want you to bar her completely. I don't want her in the house. Duncan, you can't do that.
No.
You know, I mean, even if I took her off the media list, you couldn't stop her from buying tickets. And Duncan backed down, but it was just about the most ridiculous thing that I had a request from. Certainly the one that sticks in my mind most. Which kind of segues to the next question was, what in doing your work could make your life hell? And I'll answer that one first. People who couldn't make deadlines.
That's one of mine.
I worked with a festival artistic director, the Folk Music Festival. One of my jobs is, as you say, you did everything. I was the publicist and the marketing manager, and I also wrote and edited the event program. This is the only person who ever actually made me cry. I'm sitting at my desk, it's 2 in the morning. He's supposed to have all of the information about all of the 50-odd acts that are coming to the festival so that I can get all of this to the designer. We're already 3 days late. And he's promised, and the evening comes on, and finally, it's close to 3 in the morning, and his wife phones me and says he's not feeling well, he'll have this for you tomorrow. And I literally put my head down and cried. Other things kind of made my life hell, but they became funny, and I'll tell them under the funny stories.
Ellie,
Want me to?
hell over to you.
Hell over to me. All right, well, I have a few things here. And again, getting things on time. The one thing that drove me crazy is I worked the Push Festival from the beginning for the first 13 years, I believe. And because it happens in January, and we picked January because it was a quiet time, but that meant we had to work through December. Thanks a lot. So I used to try to line up a good batch of interviews in the first week of December, just to get them done and in the can. But getting artists to send me their bio, I mean, isn't it their own career?
Yes.
Why don't they have a bio like saying it'll be there in 30 seconds? What do you mean you have to do something to get your bio? You know, it just should be there. I don't know. I still to this day don't understand that. just drove me crazy. And what do I have here? Oh, yes. I had a pet peeve with CBC, especially the afternoon show. I would have these artists that have been doing interviews since the breakfast shows. And were also booked on a different show for CBC's afternoon show at that time. And at the very last second, being bumped by some politician they had talked to 3 times already that day. And I just about wanted to sock somebody. I really did. And like, no respect for this artist who's been, waiting here for half an hour for you to make up your mind. So that really pissed me off. And my third bone to pick was always Charlie Smith and picking an image for the cover. It was like, no matter how good an image you sent him, he'd go, no, I've seen that somewhere else. We can't run that,
Yes, I
and
remember
then
that.
I'd be going crazy to find some picture that no one in the world has seen, all for Charlie.
Yeah.
And of course, you have to get something that lays out well with their logo and the teasers they have on the front page. So it all had to fit. Anyways, that was me trying to not bite my nails again.
Yeah, though that was a tough one. I remember getting to the point where I would insist that we have at least 3 photos, and I would send one to the Straight, one to the Province, one to the Sun, with a note saying this is exclusive to you. Don't worry, it's not going to appear anywhere else. So it was often a bit of a chore to get the artist to supply 3 great pictures, but it was sort of what we had to do.
But at least being freelance, one assumes you had media come in advance. We had to create all of ours. Well, we take some advanced photo shoots, but in fact, I loved doing the advanced photo shoots for posters when you still had photo posters. It was a delight to be able to do that. Although the artists that didn't get chosen for the poster could sometimes get their noses out of joint. But I don't know if you all understand the way it would work is the media only want things when it's fresh, when it's the week of the show is going to be opening. But that's the most challenging week when people are in rehearsal. And particularly the rehearsal period for the Arts Club was 3 weeks, usually, maybe 2.5. And so that was their most precious week, and the director, particularly some directors, rarely wanted to give up much time for media interviews, even if you had, and the media call, they were resented enough as it well. But so they didn't want to give up the time, and you had to sort of sweet talk, and I'm not very good at that. But you had to sort of sweet talk them to get the time for the interviews or things during production week, which is such a crucial time, when, especially for new plays that are just getting finished even half the time. So that was very hard. And then again, if a camera didn't show up the day that they'd carved out all this time for, and frequently, we used to say you'd never be guaranteed the TV cameras unless the theater burned down. And which was true. One day they had a dumpster fire on the balcony somewhere, and all the TV crews showed up for that.
Everybody was out for it.
But so that was sort of regular
If it
hell,
bleeds,
and
it
it happened every
leads.
3 weeks. So and we always had, well, it was 3 theaters at that time, so there was always one just opening, one in the works, and some of them they ran for a long time, so you could let it go. But then when things would change over, you'd be juggling pretty fast. And the second one was typos, and particularly in programs, but occasionally on a poster. And you do your best. I probably can tell you which is a 2L Allen. The EN Allens, the 1L Allens. I had the Allens down pat, I thought, but don't quiz me now, I'm older. But it was whatever's law that whichever actor could be the most challenging to work with or director was the one that was going to happen to. So there was Hamlet that played at the Stanley, and somehow there was a last-minute shuffling, and that was of a program organization so that they could get a bigger logo for the sponsor on there. And damned if Morris Panich, the director's name, didn't fall off and didn't get caught. Well, that was heard about 10 o'clock at night on the first night of shows. So I personally had to find the designer to make stickers. I personally had to sticker 800 programs for the next night, and I was not very beloved of all the ushers for the next 4 weeks of that show, who had to sticker programs every night. And of course, he drinks fairly expensive scotch, Mr. Panich, so he got it too. Anyway, so typos were miserable usually.
Wow. Yeah.
I remember that there was at one time only 2 active theaters in Vancouver. There was Freddie Wood and the Vancouver Little Theatre
Wow.
on Commercial Drive.
Yeah.
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 And they challenged each other. I mean, this
That's
was
nice.
a little theater company
Wow.
on just off of Hastings near, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
Not being a driver, I could never remember. I would just get on the bus and get there.
Yeah. That was just a little before my time, but
Amazing.
Wow.
I heard stories. Yeah.
I wonder who was writing the paper, who were writing the reviews then.
That's when Joy Coghill did her Tea House of the August Moon at the
Right.
Vancouver Little Theatre,
Huh.
which was in fact York Theatre.
Oh,
And,
it's funny. I should have been cast in that. I was
learned
experienced
You're
in
Hugh
that role. So this next question could lead to a lot of spilled tea and some very interesting stories, I hope.
Uh-oh.
What moments in your career still make you laugh, cringe, or shake your head when you remember them? Do you want to start?
No, I don't really. Again,
Oh,
I
I'm the
can't-
cringer.
Yeah, you're,
Well,
yeah.
I'll just do a
Something may come
fast
to
one.
mind.
Something well.
Nicola Cavendish, bless her heart, did a number of versions of Salt Spring and Blowin' on Boa and whatever. And she had this great idea of serving chocolates on a platter for opening night for all of us to go out in the audience. And okay, fine, great. You know, you don't argue with Nicola, and it was sort of fun. But I had a strapless outfit on. And I looked down at one point, and there was a tit on a platter. Well, very fast. I don't know if anyone ever saw it. If you were in the audience and you saw it, don't tell me. But so that was one of my funnier moments.
Well, of course, a lot of my memories and stories are theater related, but a great many more of them are festival related. So I hope you don't mind me going a little off theme here. But although there is one theater story that in the 70s, I was one of 3 theater critics, well, if you could call me a critic, in town. Christopher Defoe was at the Vancouver Sun, and James Barber was at the Province.
right.
And publicists used to seat us together in a row. I don't quite know why, but you know, it never came to fisticuffs.
So you could
We all got along fairly well. But one day we were at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre to see a ballet. I do not remember what ballet it was. I think it was the National Ballet. Had come to town. When we got our programs, there was a little blow-in sheet, a little piece of paper that explained that a certain scene, whatever it was, scene such and such, will not be performed because the set got lost in transit. Air Canada had lost it or put it in the wrong warehouse and it hadn't arrived. And so, unfortunately, with apologies, they wouldn't be doing that scene. The next day's papers arrived. Those were the days when the critics would file their copy by 11 o'clock and it would be in the following day's papers. And James Barber's review in the Province was a glowing scene-by-scene review, including the scene that wasn't seen. Yeah, that was really impressive.
Jeannie Reed got caught doing that a couple times.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've heard it. That apparently others have done that as well. I never quite had the jam to do something like that. But my 2 most interesting moments that I don't know whether to laugh or cringe when I think of them, but they were festival related. One of them was a Margaret Atwood moment. The first time Margaret Atwood came to the Writers' Festival, and we were still using fax in those days.
Yeah.
And her publicist back east faxed me a crib sheet, as we did, and It was, as the talking points, these are the themes of the book that we're promoting. These are some questions you might ask. And then there was a little footnote. These are things that Miss Atwood won't talk about. It was mostly family-related stuff. And I faxed this through. The first booking I'd made for her was on the Bill Good show. And I faxed this through to Gladys, the producer. And shortly thereafter, Gladys phoned me. And she said, I've got this list of things that Margaret Atwood won't talk about. Well, who does she think she is? Well, if you've ever worked a festival, you know what festival psychosis is like, and I was in the middle, and I wasn't ready, and I snapped. And I said, pardon my language, I said, I guess she thinks she's Margaret fucking Atwood, and if this is the space she needs to be Margaret Atwood, we have to give it to her. Gladys calmed right down. I got Atwood to the studio, and we had a great interview with Bill, and that all was forgiven. But yeah, that was kind of a moment. Mm-hmm. And another one was, I believe, I've heard that this moment was actually played every Christmas at the Christmas party of the TV station in question when they had all their bloopers. Apparently they have a, Michael Moore was in town promoting his second book, Downsize This, I think is what it was called. And Michael was an interesting character, and I spent the better part of a week squattering him around to media. Everybody wanted a piece of Michael Moore. It was very topical at the time. And I was booking everybody I could get a hold of. CBC was not returning my calls. We were not, it was all, oh, or if they did, it was, okay, well, we'll see if we can, we'll get back to you. And I remember the last call I made and didn't get through, I was actually in the CKNW studio. He was on air, and I was waiting for a cab to get him over to UTV. We went to UTV. Mark Drishon did an interview with him. A nice thing about Michael Moore, a sweet thing about him, he had only one requirement, that every day, at one point, I had to find a space where there was a phone where he could call his wife, and, which kind of endeared him to me. At any rate, we're at UTV. We come out of the studio after the interview, and the Venetian blinds are closed and the window out onto 2nd Avenue, and the staff of UTV are peering through the Venetian blinds. What? So I go and look, and there's a CBC TV crew out on the sidewalk. Well, nobody wants to see their competition's TV crew out on the sidewalk, so they're a little, and I'm, okay. So, all right, the taxi that I'd called for pulled up, and I said, okay, Michael, here we go. And we head out, and the TV people get right in our face. Mr. Moore, we need you, and I said, I'm sorry. I mean, I had just an hour earlier had a phone call from Nardwar, the human serviette, asking if he could do an interview. And I said, listen, Nardwar, we're booked solid. I'm taking him from here to the Georgian Court Hotel, where I have to get him up to the rooftop because Fox TV has got to connect that he's on a panel thing that we have to, and then, it's tight. So the taxi, me, the CBC TV crew, and the reporter's just not giving any, he's got the camera and the mic, and Moore kind of makes a joke about it and says, well, I've got to go because I've got an interview with the campus radio station. And they're kind of my people, he said. And the CBC guy said, well, why would you not have time for the national TV station? And I don't remember what Moore said, but I opened the door, he got in the cab, the reporter steps up, sticks the mic in my face, and says, starts on how could you not, and I just leaned into him, again, pardon my language, I said, don't you get up my fucking nose, I'm having the publicist's day from hell. Did you ever want to do that?
Yeah.
And I walked around and got in the cab and off we went. And Moore apologized, as our way down to the Georgia Court, Michael Moore,
God.
he said, I'm really sorry I kind of set you up for that. And I said, it's okay, it's your shtick, and I really believe in what you're doing, so, you know, we'll just carry on. I really liked the guy. I know a lot of people found him quite abrasive, but apparently that little clip was played for years thereafter at the blooper parties.
roll.
Because, you know, so that's the only time, 2 times in 20 years as a publicist where I completely lost it. Anyway, I'm sorry, how are we doing for time?
I think we're getting over up to Tanya there, but
What time are we supposed to wrap it up?
Tanya?
5:30 would
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah, so we've got 25 minutes.
we got
that sounds-
25
sounds a
minutes
little
to
long.
rattle on, and then there's all sorts of refreshments and more tea. I hope you stay and chat among yourselves and ask us some more questions.
Well, we-
But what were some of the most memorable talents you worked with or for, Ellie?
Well, there's actually one that just jumps out above all the rest. Her name is Miriam Margulies. I had no idea who she was, but after reading her bio, I realized that I had to introduce her as Professor Sprout because she's in all the Harry Potter movies. So she was booked into the cult, and I figured this out, about 2012. And she had just come from Toronto, and she said to me, I played 1 freaking night in Toronto. How am I going to do 2 weeks here? Are you people out of your minds? And I said, no, we know our audience. So, because I had B-roll, and you guys will appreciate this, B-roll referring to video, most of the artists I worked with did not. So this was a treat to have somebody that had lots of video. And besides the Harry Potter stuff, she was on all these talk shows in England and Australia, where she now lives. And she's just loose-lipped. She'll say anything on TV. So I got her booked everywhere on the breakfast show. I do not, at that point, I no longer drove or had a car. So the cult was fine. They said, here's a fistful of taxi chits, just do what you have to do. So we did all the breakfast TV shows. And on top of this, I'm not a morning person. So this was an effort. The other thing that was hilarious about her is back home, she had like her own publicist or agent or whoever she was looking after her. And she kept telling me, now make sure she sees a hairdresser before every show. Well, Miriam Margulies looks like a bag lady. She would show up in really old sweats and an old t-shirt and her hair just like this. And that's how she wanted to be seen. And I was fine with that if she was. And so she did all the TV shows. We get to the last one, and she said, my dear, I'd like to take you to brunch. And I thought, no one had ever offered that to me before. And I said, it'd be lovely to spend brunch with you. So in those days, Griffin's was still in the Hotel Vancouver. I loved that place. Why did they take it away? It was the best place to take your mom.
Yeah.
Anyways, we went there because also there was a smorgasbord. Well, she went for the smorgasbord. I went for a light breakfast. But she went back 3 times to the smorgasbord. Anyways, the show she did was called Dickens Women, where she dumped on every relationship he ever had with women. Wow. And it was great. And by the time she took me to breakfast, I had told her that morning, I said, Miriam, the entire run is sold out. And so she was thrilled. And I don't know if she tours anymore, but if she does, I hope she comes back to Vancouver because she liked us.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And we obviously loved her.
That's great. Well, we didn't bring in a lot of big names at the Arts Club. It was just everybody. I have my list of just the shows I worked on, 130 over 12 years, you know, and there are so many people. I mean, Bill Millard stands out there, of course, because I think he's a really not misunderstood, but not enough understood person. I didn't even appreciate him when I first arrived there. I was a sort of alternative theater person and a little bit cheeky, and I just pictured the more middle of the road things he'd done, although he'd already done tons of radical things like Bent at Seymour Street and Being at Home with Claude, so many things, The Seahorse and The 7 Stories. So he was really, but he was genuinely diverse. He would love a musical and a Noel Coward show as much as he would love a brand new strange play, but he didn't promote himself that much. So you didn't quite appreciate that he really understood all these things and helped us to understand them. So in terms of people, but he was notoriously cheap, and it was true. It was true. But he did invent the art of recycling, I swear, because he'd come into my office, and instead of looking me in the eye while he was talking to me, he was looking at the paper that was thrown away in the wastebasket and figuring out, and right at the end of the conversation, he'd bring out the sheets of paper again that could be recycled. But this was before recycling, right? And I had to go out and have a meeting with him, the annual review, even though there's a big company. And I had to cry for a raise because I needed to pay for parking so I wouldn't be running out and moving the car every 3 hours, as you have to do on Granville Island. But he was still the most generous spirit emotionally. He knew I was a single mom. There were other people that could have been better qualified for my job, particularly as it moved up into heavier marketing and goals and all the things we had to fulfill in terms of, you know, marketing, branding, and whatever as things moved along. And he really was dedicated to doing things, and doing new things, even though, talk about the things that made your life hell that I forgot to say, was new plays, because it hadn't yet got to the point that a script had to be even written to get on the playbill sometimes, because the playbill was also still flexible for a number of years. It was to be announced, to be confirmed, and sometimes it didn't make it. But sometimes it did, and the play was getting written right up to opening day sometimes, which could be a little scary when you're a publicist. And especially there were a couple that were dodgy, and notably one in the Stanley that even changed authors just before it was produced. And it was the Stanley, this brand new spanking theater, but he was dedicated to that writer. He was dedicated to new works also being done at the Stanley. Now they have dramaturges, they have a whole new play development program thanks to all that. But I think it was an amazing thing. It was an amazing thing that he developed. He was dedicated to local talent. He was, and not appreciated for it. And it wasn't just that he was like to save money, but that was just getting to know him over the years and knowing how diverse his taste really was, and still moves me really, because he still goes out to see things, and he traveled to India on his own last year, and he's in his 80s now, you know, But the biggest name that I got to deal with was Kurt Vonnegut. And yeah, he didn't show up to town because he was going through a messy divorce and he was feeling blue. But I got to talk to Kurt Vonnegut about his being blue about his divorce, and listening to the Statler brothers counting flowers on the wall was his solace. And he wrote this comedy, which probably nobody ever produced again. It was a premiere done at the Arts Club called Make Up Your Mind. But I loved it. It was totally twisted, of course. But just in being able to, and I still have a very faded fax that said to Bennett from Vonnegut, and it's fading more all the time, you know. But it was great to speak to a man of his brilliance. And Richard F. Maltby was another brilliant man who came with a review called Closer Than Ever. That he Maltby writes crosswords still for the New York Times, but he also had written the lyrics for Miss Saigon, for example. And he was again a really understated person. He wasn't blowing himself up at all. You had to, you know, but his words were impeccable. And those were two people. But some other local talents. Tim is going to throw out one. Dennis Simpson.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to get all verklempt about this one. Dennis was funny every time you met him as an actor, and he'd always make you laugh. And yet he came up with a show with Leslie Milner called Wang Dang Doodle of music, which Dee Daniels played the role of God, and Laurie Murdoch played a saw in it, for example. But Dennis, he just had the warmest heart in the world. I've got a poster over there of Blowin' on Bowen that he was in. People, so many. Anne Mortivy, and she was actually a warm person. She was one of the only actors who, especially the writers, who'd go up and say, "And how are you, Lynn? How are you doing? What's up with you?"
Yeah.
You know, we got used to not being sort of wallpaper, really. But so there were so many, and there still are so many. So I'm glad everybody's still, or a lot of people are still around. But we noticed that poster for Blowin' on Bowen that, what is it, 4 out of the 6 are gone now?
Yeah. Lynn, were you the publicist at the Arts Club the year? And I wish I could remember the name of the play, but it was a play. There were 4 women playing bridge.
Yeah,
What was it?
that was 13 Hands, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had all the time in the world for Bill Millard. He was very good to me in the 70s and onward, and we got along really well, and I admired his programming, the work that he did. You know, so many really daring productions like Creeps but yeah, he was kind of tight with a nickel because
Could be.
Susie Payne was in that show.
Right.
And a year or 2 later, they remounted it, and the poster had the same 4 women on it. And I ran into Susie somewhere, and I said, "Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing you again." And she said, "I'm not in it." And I said, "Oh, you're on the poster." She said, "I know, he's using the same photo. That's Bill all over. He's too cheap to hire another photographer."
Yeah, we may have been involved in that. Yes. Dolores, who lives here, was in one of those 2 productions. So.
Well, I worked with and for so many really terrific people. I mean, the event producers like David Y.H. Louie, who had quite a reputation in his day. We were very close friends. He was at my 20th birthday party, and he was at my 60th birthday party. I remember the first Dragon Boat Festival. He was doing the entertainment programming, and we were walking across the site, and he pulled on my sleeve and he said, "Kevin, don't forget that your job is to make me look good." Okay, David, I'll do my best. And he was, for a lot of people, he was not easy to work with. But, and years later, over lunch one day, he said, "Kevin, why do people think I'm such a monster?" And I was a good enough friend that I could say, "Because, David, you have been a monster at times." And I've worked with some very difficult people, including David Y.H. Louie and the late Alma Lee and Francis Wasserlein at the Folk Music Festival. And my response, well, there was some arts organization had some kind of a seminar, and one of the breakout groups was a discussion with some sort of human resources counselor about how to deal with difficult people in the arts. And it was all this corporate blah, 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 blah. And I at one point, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I said, "I think the arts is different, because I've worked with David Y.H. Louie, the most difficult person in the city, and Alma Lee, who's a very demanding taskmistress, and several others that I could name. And I developed the philosophy that if, when the curtain goes up, the show knocks my socks off, it was worth it. That was fine. I will put up with whatever I have to put up with to work with and publicize a fabulous show, because that's my job. And if it weren't for a lot of really difficult people back in the day, we wouldn't have the cultural scene here in Vancouver that we have right now. That's my personal take on that. But I also, you know, I mentioned a number of people. I did several shows over the years as publicist with Ruth Nickel. And yeah, again, someone who paid attention to everybody who was, you involved and took an interest. And back in the earliest days, the people in theater who took me seriously when it was quite clear that I hadn't a clue what I was doing as a critic and taught me a great deal were people like Jace Van Der Veen and Owen Foran. And I'm very grateful for them. And in the literary world, of course, working with Margaret Atwood was several times was always a delight, and John Irving and so many others. So it was a big part of the joy of the work that I did, and I think I speak for all of us, was the people we did get to meet. And I don't know if any of you know a late Irish author named Maeve Binchy, but you know, when you're working in the field, famous people are here from out of town, and they say, oh, if you're ever in Boston, or if you're ever in wherever, and you know they're just being polite. But Maeve and I had quite an interesting time together while she was here. She had very bad arthritis, and her publisher hired a limousine to drive us around to all her media things. You know, the CBC courtyard where those pools are? I stepped out of the limo right into one of the pools, just sloshing through the hallways at the CBC. But when my parents and I and Dave Abbott and his wife Diane went to Ireland, I thought, oh, what the heck? And I think we were still faxing in those days. I don't know. Anyway, I sent a message to her care of the Dublin Times, which she had a column in, asking, you know, would it be possible to meet for coffee? And she got back to me right away, and she said, oh, nonsense. You'll come out to our place for lunch. Wow. And she and Gordon lived in a little town called Dalkey, which is like to Dublin, like White Rock is to Vancouver, and it has a sky train that we took out there. Maeve said in her invitation, she said, we'll have lunch at the pub next door because that's actually closer to my living room than my dining room is. And we got there and were welcome and went next door to the pub, which was indeed several steps closer to her living room than her kitchen was. And you know, just had a lovely visit, and that was a really, you know, that sort of connections that you make in casual working with people like that, and it's just a part of the pleasure of the work. So, how are we doing time-wise? All right.
This has got to be it.
What were the top shows you appeared in, reviewed, or publicized that you will always remember? Can you mention three?
Yeah, the first one is Lilies, which was a tri-production with Pink Ink and Touchstone, Michel Marc Bouchard. And it turned into a film later on, but it was a film, all male cast, set in a prison where they were telling the story of two young men who fell in love with each other. And Alan Morgan played a countess who was living in the woods, basically abandoned by her husband. And he was just so, I think one of the well, besides it was beautifully written, it was just, and I always looked, if it's a show that I couldn't ever think of writing it myself, that's got to be it. And there's layers of premise, but Alan's performance as this single mother countess, sort of demented, I think I must have identified with her, probably with him. But it was still one of the more beautiful productions ever. And oh God, I just forgot the second one. The second one was just recently back east. Is called Down Syndrome by the Dozen. Great little company of the neurodivergent people that I was in as well. A young man with Down syndrome wrote the show and kept writing the show and kept writing the show, kept writing the show. Fortunately, the woman who was wrangling him as a director reined him in, but I got to be Uncle Gordon, the 400-year-old elf in that show. And but just in Eyes on Another World, it was a wonderful experience working with these people who are underestimated, to say the least.
We still have the ears that she wore.
We do, and and even product-wise, it was different. It was great. And the other one was Dry Lips Oughta Move to Kappa's Casing.
Yes.
But that also opened my eyes, because the first read-through was in the apartment of one of the performers, and I think I was one of the only 3 non-Indigenous people that were there in that apartment, and I realized I knew nothing. And yet it was such a rich world, and the show was pretty good too. But those are my 3 standouts.
Who was the person that acted in Billy Bishop? In Billy Bishop.
I don't, that Eric Peterson here?
Eric.
Yeah, that
That
wasn't
was
one of
Eric.
mine, so I don't know.
Ellie?
For my shows, I just picked one really, so we'll
Okay.
stick with that. And that was in the Push Festival. James Fagan Tate's interpretation of Crime and Punishment.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was a musical, but not that kind of musical. More like Kurt Weill kind of musical. The music was by Jolisa Pankania. Kevin MacDonald played Raskolnikov. And it was New World Theatre's production in association with Vancouver Living Theatre.
Oh,
We had, I think, about 10 people from the downtown east side had roles to play in that place. Anyways, I brought down Cable 4, who were the best at media calls by that time, down for a media call, and we were at Campbell Avenue. And we were in the auditorium, and they just ran through the opening sequence. And I started to cry. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.
Wow.
And I just don't know how the people at Cable 4 got through it, because it was really astounding. It was something new. And I've always dreaded the fact that theater can be so elusive, because I wish I could have seen that show again and again and again and again. So that's the one I dream about.
not to eclipse you yet, but I think that's the point looking back. It's truly, we used to say it, the ephemerality of theater, but it's true, isn't it? There's so many shows I wish, if I could just have it again, just if I could just see it again one more time. And so often, how often did you go through your grocery lists when you were sitting there watching a show, or thinking or worrying about something else? Don't be there, because they're doing it for you, and it's not going to happen again. So I'm with you on that one.
Exactly.
Oh, back to
Totally.
what was yours?
Well, my
He's got to do one last thing.
the very first actor I ever interviewed as a columnist in the Georgia Straight was Jackie Crossland. And I showed up with a bottle of wine, and we drank it all and had a great interview at her apartment over in Kitsano. And the show that she was working on and produced at the Cultch was called The Ruins of Espremar. And Espremar is supermarket with a couple of letters missing. It was a post-apocalyptic sort of a show. And I don't know if it sort of sticks in my memory and in my heart, because that's where I met Jackie Crossland and started a friendship with her. But the others, about the same period, I saw Susie Payne at the Cultch in Woman Alone by Dario Fo. And it opened my eyes to the possibilities of what a one-actor performance could do and could be. She was just amazing. And because of it, years later, I just couldn't be angry at her when she fired me as Tamanous Theatre's publicist. But, again, just out of the blue, Owen Underhill's Star Catalogs, a new music opera. The posters leaning against the wall, which I hope you have a look at, are all shows that I did. The ones lying on the table are from Lynn's, and I've mentioned several of those shows, and she's mentioned a couple of hers. Owen Underhill's Star Catalogs, And then something that I can close my eyes and still see is Barbara Bourget's Rite of Spring, which they did at Performance Works, it's a Kokoro dance, Rite of Spring. Just an extraordinary interpretation. And I was never either a new music or a dance fan in a big way, but those are the shows that stay with me. And we're just about out of time, I think. Well, we are out of time. So thank you all very, very much. I did have a couple more questions, but they're really
Too bad.
not necessary. And if you have any questions, we can turn the lights up. Yes?
I just wanted to follow up on your May Vinci, the story that on one of her visits here, I was the volunteer who was supposed to walk her from the Arts Club Theatre office to the Arts Club main stage, because that was her presentation for that day.
Yes.
But of course, that was the easiest volunteer job because she had the limousine take her from one place to the other, so I didn't need to do anything. But she autographed my book, or the book that I bought of hers, and I think that was either the Cup of Beach or Glass Lake.
Yes.
And she wrote a lovely inscription in the front for me, encouraging me to write my own book. And I'm in the process of doing
Yes.
it now, many years later.
Yeah.
But she was really lovely, and when she looked at you, when she spoke to you, she looked at you.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to matter who was around. She had a huge lineup of people, and all kinds of people around. But she was looking at me, speaking to me personally.
It's a difference,
I always
isn't it?
remembered that.
Yeah, that's great. So you and I work together. And I'm sure there are lots of people in this room that we've worked with, that, you know, in various capacities. Anyone else have any questions that,
Well, first of all, it's a segue into my question, but when you said back in the days of fax, I heard with my hearing aids, back in the days when we had facts.
yeah, that too.
I was curious about, you mentioned early on the change from the media kits to doing things by email. I was curious about what other sea changes in your jobs, your focus had come over the years.
Well, and because I'm not in the field and haven't been for many years, I really don't know what it's like today. I just know that media is dying.
But in your day?
In our day, it was thriving. There were TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, weekly newspapers, daily newspapers.
So I came in sort of at the end of, not the end, but, you know, further on in time, because I didn't start into theater until 99, I think was the first show I did. But what I remembered most is that you just had this, as you were talking about, people would actually pick up their phones in those days.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point of people having voicemail, and then they no longer picked up their phones. I mean, it was like progressive. Every bit of technology took us further and further away from the media.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
luckily, I'm sure each of us had some of our favorites. I mean, Margaret at CBC was so good to me. I was a publicist here at Western Gold until a couple years ago. And it was getting difficult because my media list was no longer functional. Yeah. And so it didn't help. Yeah.
We're getting the time's up signal, but Bernard has one.
So we'll adjourn to the lobby.
One thing
I
to,
just wanted to say, this has been a fantastic forum. You guys are amazing.
well, thank you.
And I know we've mostly seen this, but when I spoke to John, what's brilliant to hear this and know that we know what it should be. This morning I looked at the stupid Facebook thing, and it said Michael J. Fox has died, age 62.
There you go.
And
Not true.
John, I said, John, is that false? And John said, yeah, it's false news. I mean, that's what we've
Yeah,
come to
imagine.
today.
Yeah.
That's not our fault. And to listen to you guys today was terrific.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard.
I'm sorry that was so short. Short.
Yeah.
We hope it didn't feel too long.
Next time, give us 4 hours.